Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Heroku. Heroku is a popular cloud platform supporting multiple programming languages. We're going to use it to host a Django app. So in this tutorial, we're going to create and prepare a Django app and ready that for deployment to the Heroku servers. Now, there are many approaches and methods of getting a Django app onto getting and managing a Django app on Heroku. We're going to be configuring PyCharm with GitHub so that we're going to then connect GitHub with Heroku and then deploy the app. So we're going to go from PyCharm to GitHub and then GitHub to Heroku. So that's the setup that I'm going to go through in this tutorial. So we'll finish off with configuring a Postgres database with Heroku. And if there's any questions, please leave them in the comments. This is a fairly tricky process, or it can be a fairly tricky process if you're new to doing something like this. I'm using Ubuntu here. The process that I go through, it should be similar to Windows. So definitely have a go if you're using Windows or Mac OS. But again, if you've got any problems, then please leave a comment. So I'm going to, first of all, create a project, a Django project. We'll leave that on the desktop. I'm going to call it proj1. So I create a new project for Django. So the first task that we need to do is head over to the terminal. So there's a few steps here to ready this application, this new application for deployment to Heroku. So first of all, we're going to install Gunicorn. So we just need to type in pip install and then Gunicorn, G-U-N-I-C-O-R-N, and let that run. So this is a web server gateway interface. So it deals with what happens in between the web server and the web application. It's a very popular application that's going to be running on the server to actually get our app working on the server. There's a few tasks it does. So Gunicorn communicates with multiple web servers. It reacts to web requests and it might distribute the load. Keeps multiple processes of the web application running. So it has quite a big role to play in this process. So that's installed. So our next task, we're going to need to create two new files, one called procfile and another called runtime.txt. So I'll try and use the command line as less as possible, but I'm just going to use the command touch to create a new file, and I'm going to create the procfile, so P-R-O-C-F-I-L-E. So there's no file extension here. So I'll create that file first, and then I touch a new file. So touch, and then I'm going to create a new file called runtime.txt. So these are two files that I need to create. So if I just go into the project folder, I'll open up the procfile first. So in here, we need to type web : Gunicorn, and then the name of our project. So I think it's proj1. Yeah, so I'm making proj1. And then you're going to need the extension WSGI. Okay, so that's what we need to do there. So web server gateway interface. So we can close that. The next task is the runtime. So this is basically just going to tell Heroku what version of Python we're using. So if you're not too sure, just type in Python --version. That will give you the version of Python, so 3.7.5. So heading back to that runtime text file, I'm just going to type in Python 3.7.5 and save it. So those are the two files that are needed. So once those are completed, next of all, we now need to set up our static files. So our project normally has some sort of static files. They might be CSS files or JavaScript files or images. And that's normally stored in a folder called static. So first of all, I head over to my project and I create a new directory called static. And I'm just going to put a new file in there called main.css. It's just handy. Once I upload this to GitHub, it won't upload a empty folder. So I just put something in it for now. So that folder is created. And now we need to open up the proj1 folder and head into the settings. Now, in order for us to actually serve static files, our own static files, we're going to first of all install a piece of software that's going to enable us to do that, called whitenoise. So pip install whitenoise. So I get that installed in the terminal, and now I need to add a few lines of code at the bottom of my settings page. So there's 3 entries here. I'll just paste them in. Static root, static URL, and static files DIRs. So those are the settings needed to set up static files. And last of all, we need to add a configuration for static files using whitenoise. So we do that with this command here. So this is from the document from the whitenoise document that you can view online, the documentation, sorry. So what you'll find if you have been looking at different tutorials on how to do this process, I find that most of the tutorials are quite old, and this line of code is utilizing the old version of whitenoise. So this is the version for I think whitenoise 4.0 we're using, or we're using 5 now, but 4 and above, we'll use this command here. To finish off, installing whitenoise or using whitenoise, integrating whitenoise, we need to go over to the middleware, and the second line down has to be the second line. We're going to put whitenoise in there. So the reason why we put it up the top here is because we want it to run first before we run all these other items. So that's that done. What we can do now is just test to see if this is working. So if it isn't working on our server, when we upload it to Heroku, it's not going to work. So it's definitely worth testing if your static pages are working correctly. So we can do that by going into a terminal and using our manage py file, and then typing in the command collect static. Okay, so you can see here that everything is working okay. So what you'll have now in your project folder is a folder called static files. You can just delete that. That's something that the server will create when we upload to Heroku. So that's all working great. So the last item for now, what we need is we need to tell the Heroku server what applications, dependencies, libraries that this application needs. So if we go back into the terminal, we need to type in the command pip freeze requirements.txt. Okay, so that should make a requirements.txt file. So let's just have a look inside of it. And you can see that these are all the dependencies here that are needed to be installed in order to get this application working. Of course, if we're using other packages, this list would be slightly bigger. But the idea is that we want to install the right packages to get our application working. So that's how that's done, creating a requirements text file. So in this next phase, I'm now going to connect this application to GitHub. So if I go over to the VCS option and then go to import into version control and then share project on GitHub, I need to now log in utilizing my login and password, my GitHub login and password. Once I've done that, I'm presented with this share project on GitHub. I'm going to be calling it proj1 and then just press share. Okay, so we have been presented with an error message here, not found Git. So we are going to need to install the Git tools. But first of all, let's just open up GitHub to see what we've just done. So I've headed over to github.com and I've logged in. You can see now that I've got a new repository here. So the process I've just been through, took you through there, it did make a new repository. So to install Git, I'll type in sudo apt install Git. Okay, so once Git is installed, I head over to VCS and enable version control integration. Press OK. Now I've set that, I can now right click my project and then Git and then add. And then if I go to the commit option, I can now select the files I want to save to GitHub. So from this list, I'm going to deselect idea. I want my project files and static, and I don't want to upload the venv folder, the virtual environment folder. So I don't need that. And all the other files can be selected. So once you're happy with that, I'll press commit. Apologies. First commit and then commit. So I'll be asked to configure these options here. That's not a problem. So I fill in that form, press submit, and now I have my, if you now go to the bottom here, master, and then select master and then push, we can then define the remote. So the remote is going to be, if you go into your browser in your project, add this line here, press OK. And now just check what we're pushing to GitHub and then press push. Okay, so all the files in my project are now going to be uploaded. And if I refresh this page, you can now see we've got all the project files in place. So now we need to set up Heroku. So if you've got a login, then go ahead and log in. If not, just sign up. It's a free service, or at least you can utilize some of their services for free, and you'll be able to complete this tutorial using that free service. Okay, so once you've signed up and logged in, go over to the apps page and create a new app. So I'm going to call this test server. Oh no, it's not available. Big add 2. Okay, and then create the new app. Right, so once you've created the app, you can see here we've got 3 deployment methods. So you can download the Heroku Git for PyCharm and deploy via the command line. So I'm going to be using GitHub to deploy this application. Now, I've already got this set up. So if you head over to this user icon here and then select applications, you'll be then able to connect your Heroku service to your GitHub page. So once you've done that, you can then head over back to your app. And then go to deploy and then select GitHub. So we need to search for our app, which is proj1. So we connect to proj1. There we go. So we have this message. We can just ignore that. So in order to now deploy our application, we can do this automatically. So every time we upload, push to GitHub, this will automatically determine that that's been done, and then it will then automatically deploy that new version. Now we can do the deploying manually, utilizing this deploy branch button here. So we're going to select the master branch and then press deploy. So what's happening now is that your project is being downloaded to Heroku, and it's going to try and deploy the project. So you can see on mine, it says here that Python 3.7.5 is not available on this stack. So I'm just going to head back over to my runtime text file. Just change that to a lowercase, press save. And then I'm going to commit that. I just want to commit the runtime file and press commit. And then go over to master and then push. So that's going to upload it to GitHub. And once that's completed, I'll head back over to Heroku and then try and deploy again. Okay, so this time it's worked, and we'll see if that then installs. So the app was successfully deployed. If I now go and view, I still have, or should still have, an error, application error. So what we need to do now is head back into our settings file. So at the top here, it defines allowed host. So what we need to do is define the host that is allowed to serve this application. So our default host is that. And then what we need to do now is just configure this to Heroku. So if I head over and select that and press save, and then I need to go through the process again of committing that. Again, apologies, I need to sort that. So I want to save the settings file only, commit that. And then I go back to my master and then push. And then what I need to do again is go back to here and deploy my branch again. The deploy was successful again. If I go back to my web page, I can see that my web page is working fine now. So the Django app is working perfectly. Now, there were a few things that I had to change to get this working. First thing I needed to do, for some reason, the server wasn't starting. So I had to delete the server, and I restarted or recreated the server again. There was an error. So in order to access those errors, I went into the app, and you can view the logs. From here, you can see the logs. So the benefit of having the Heroku app installed into PyCharm is that you can just use a command prompt to find all this information. But with a little bit of researching, I found that the server just wasn't coming on for some reason. So like I said, I recreated the server again, and I went in and I changed my allowed host to this time 22. And I also was just looking at my proc file, and I made a space here between the colon and the Goonihorn word. And then obviously I committed that and pushed that to GitHub. So those were the small changes that I had to make in order to get to this point. But the application is now running, And the next thing we need to do is start thinking about databases. So now we have our application working. Let's now go over how to utilize the Heroku database. So if I go to resources in my app, by default, Heroku sets up a database which is connected to my app. If I click on this, this should take me to my database. Here we go. And what I need here is in settings, I need to go to the database credentials and just view those credentials in a second. So this is a Postgres database. I now need to go into my application and configure this for Postgres database. So head over to the settings file. First thing we need to do is go down to the databases, and we will need to remove this piece of code here. So I've now reconfigured this piece of code. It's going to be using a Postgres database, and we've got name, user, password, host, and port. So all this information here is going to be found by going into this viewing credentials. So this is an example of the data inserted into these parameters here. So name refers to the database name, user, password, host, port, and engine. That's all defined in the settings, except for engine, apologies. So name, user, password, host, and port are all in the Heroku settings. So once we have that filled in, our next step is to install a new dependency. So I'm going to type in, I'm going to go to the terminal, just close my server, and I'm going to type in pip install and then psycopg2 and then the binary. Okay, so this is needed to get the this database working correctly. So that's installed. So if you're using Windows or Mac, you might just need to read into installing that. You can install with just pip install and then the psycopg2. However, it's just a little bit quicker to install the binary on this system to get it working. So the next step is for us to now to run a migration. So this is a new app. The database needs to be migrated. So Python managed py migrate. Now, if that doesn't work with your database credentials in place, it means that this information is incorrect. There would be an error that appears. But what's actually happening now is a database is being created on the... So going up over to the database section, I can connect to the external database. Just test the connection. Switch to latest driver. So the connection is made. So press OK. So I should now be able to see once the database is being built. So this is a database that's being hosted by Heroku. You can see that slowly getting there. Okay, so it just takes a little bit of time. But what we need to do next is add a new super user. So Python so I'll just keep this nice and simple. So now we've added a new user. That should update the database. So I just refresh that. Now I've got my database connected. In order for that to work correctly, what I need to do is update my requirements text. So let's do that first. So we needed the pip freeze and then requirements. So we stored a module, didn't we, for the database? So we just need to add this to the requirement text. There we go. That's what we just installed for the database. So that just needs to be updated, and then we will just commit that. Okay. So again, we just push that to GitHub and then go back into Heroku, and then once again, just deploy. Okay, so it's deployed successfully again. So I go back into my Django app, go to admin, and then I'm logged in. So that just proves that now our application is using the Heroku database. So there were a few problems on the way, but we've got there in the end. So we set up a new Django app in PyCharm, and then we connected it to GitHub. I was trying to utilize in PyCharm the GUI as much as possible. Now, by no means is this the only way or the easiest way to manage repositories. The command line can sometimes be a little bit quicker to utilize. But again, like I said, I wanted to use the GUI as best as I can. There's a few ways of setting up the project. The way that I went through, it did feel a little bit clunky, but it worked. Okay, so we did that, and then our project was on GitHub, and we've been utilizing Heroku, connecting it to GitHub, and then pushing from GitHub to Heroku. So again, this is one way of deploying your application to Heroku. Like I said, we can install the Heroku tools onto PyCharm and then just push directly to Heroku. But I think it was a good experience to kind of see that flow through GitHub. Working with, it can be one method of deploying from GitHub. Okay, so if you've got any questions or if you've got any problems that need resolving, again, please leave some comments and I'll try and get back to you and help as much as I can.